Hey there, everybody! So here is some vintage action. Um, I've got a deck with me here on camera to talk to you about. Any longtime followers of mine will not be surprised that the deck I bought into vintage with was an Oath of Druids deck. Um, this has been Oath of Druids has always been one of my favorite Magic cards. Um, I remember playing with it in Standard when it was legal there, and it wasn't the greatest Standard deck. There were some Oath of Druids decks flying around. I know that they were semi-successful, but they were tier 2 probably. That I know that the tiers back then, the tiers are not like they are in Standard today, where you can have 4 or 5 tier 1 decks in Standard today, and then like another 10 decks that are tier 1.5, dependent on the metagame. It depends which 4 or 5 Standard decks are doing the best. And then there's all these 1.5 decks that are they're slightly worse than the best option, but they beat up on parts of the best option. So, for instance, at this point in time, Mono Black Aggro is a tier, or not Mono Black Aggro, Mono Black Devotion is a tier 1 standard deck. And Mono Red Aggro or Burn generally is a tier 1.5 deck because Blue White Control decks or Blue White X, whatever is playing Revelation, can beat it pretty easily. Esper, it's kind of a tough match for Esper because of all that comes into play tap lands. But they're generally able to maneuver around this card with Supreme Verdict and other things. Whereas Mono Black Control just doesn't really... It just gets beat up on it. So that's an example. But back in the day, when Tempest was standard legal, also my favorite standard era was Tempest Saga Block. I thought that that format was just super good. But back then, there was a tier 1 deck. There was one tier 1 deck. And everything else was tier 1.5. So an example would be something like Cuneo Blue Drago. That deck was an awesome deck, and it was definitely tier 1. And all the other decks weren't really that good until I think the next best deck after Draw Blue was Wildfires that I believe Kai Bude was playing with. That had Covetous Dragons and all the artifact mana. Yeah, that block was awesome. But at any rate, I completely lost the tangent I was talking about. Oh, because Oath of Druids was cool. And then an extended Oath of Druids was cool. And then, Oath of Druids was terrible until Vintage it was good. And I always wanted to play it. And then Exodus was released on Magic Online about 4 or 5 years ago-ish. And Oath of Druids was there. And it was far and away the best classic deck at the time. Until Masters Edition 3 came out, I believe, that produced Mishra's Workshop and Bazaar of Baghdad, making Oath of Druids not clearly the best deck, but one of my favorites nonetheless. In present-day Vintage, Oath of Druids is a very good deck. There are a lot of very good decks. I think that Shop's decks, by and large, are the best archetype you could play if your goal is winning. My goal is winning, but I also like to enjoy what I'm playing with. And the fact that I had to buy this deck from scratch, I opted to play blue. The shell that I bought for this deck I can branch off into many different decks, and that's what I'm going to be doing here in the videos that follow. I'll be playing, one specific deck and building up a reserve of tickets to start branching out into other decks. And for a while, they're all going to be base blue decks. They're all going to be Mana Drain or Force of Will decks. But I will go down the line and probably bring a video of each, explaining their merits, their costs, where they could be positioned in the metagame. Right now, Oath of Druids, I feel I'm not as dialed in as I used to be, but I am dialed in, and I feel like Oath of Druids right now is probably at the top of the heap after Workshop decks. And that's fine by me, because I love me some delicious Oath of Druids. But let's do a little deck tech here. So we'll start with our mana. We have 16 lands, which, if you're not familiar with Vintage, that sounds crazy. But bear with me, I'll explain why 16 lands is not the upper tier, but that's about the average. I think 15 is about the average. And I think that Storm decks play typically 10 or 11, but I could be wrong. But we are a green-blue-black deck, first and foremost. So our land assortment is 4 Misty Rainforest, which happened to be the cheapest blue fetch land at the time of buying this. 2 Tropicals, 2 Underground Seas, and an island. So this is our core of mana. And then we also have a Library of Alexandria, which, to tell you the truth, I'm not super excited with. I kind of want to cut this card, but I've only played about 20 matches, and I don't know if that's worth cutting it or not. It's played in most of the lists. And then a Strip Mine, because Oath of Druids is a popular archetype, and I want to have a trump card in the main deck for the mirror. And then a Tolarian Academy, which you'll see goes very nicely with all these artifacts. But here's the reason that there are only 16 land. We have 17, 18, 19, 21, 22 mana sources that are permanent and have no cost. And then we have a Black Lotus, which gives us a nice jump in mana as a one-time effect, and a Sol Ring, which has a cost, but produces 2 mana every turn. So with my 16 lands, I have 17, 18, 19, 20, 1, 2, 3, 4. I have 24 mana sources, which is pretty good. This is a combo control deck, so the mana requirements are a little weird. Sometimes you only need 1 land and a Mox to win, and other times you need, 5 lands in play and 2 Moxes. But that's the mana. The core of the deck is Oath of Druids. So for people who do not know what this card does, if your each upkeep, the player whose upkeep it is, chooses a target opponent. If they control more creatures than the player who is targeting, that player gets to mill cards from the top of their deck until they hit a creature, and put that creature directly into play. We have 2 copies of the same creature, so we will always hit Griselbrand. A lot of the decks play creatures. Oath of Druids is one of the only decks not to play any creatures other than the one big fatty. The other deck would be Storm, which typically plays a Blightsteel Colossus as a Tinker target, and maybe like a Grixis control deck might play only a Blightsteel, but they're generally playing some Snapcaster Mages or Vendilion Clicks. And if a deck doesn't want to put a creature into play, we have Forbidden Orchard, which is a 5-color land, and when I tap it, they get a 1/1 spirit. So, boom, there you go. And as I mentioned, we are going to be oathing into Griselbrand, which is just a gross card, and you usually win the turn he flips up, because you get to draw anywhere in between 7 and 14 cards. And there's just so many Moxen and Yawgmoth's Will, it's crazy. We've got Gaia's Blessing. This is a flex spot. I had been running Memory's Journey, which is a card that is 1 blue and an instant. Put 3 cards from a target library into its owner's graveyard. And then their flashback of just a single green, same ability. I played Memory's Journey for about 20 matches, and it was alright. I'd played it in Classic. So now I'm just trying out Gaia's Blessing, and I'm going to see where the percentage points lie. The other way to win with this deck is to assemble Time Vault and Voltaic Key, which give you infinite turns. And a Show and Tell to just put Griselbrand into play, because Griselbrand is gross. A lot of lists are running either one main deck, one sideboard of Show and Tell. Some decks are running two main deck. This was an $88 card when I bought it, so I only bought one, and I feel like there's going to be a reprint. So I didn't really want to invest in two. So that's how you win. How do we stay alive long enough in the format that can just straight up kill you on turn 1 or turn 2? Or lock you out of the game on turn 1 or turn 2? This is how. This protection suite. We've got all these free counter spells because sometimes you are on the draw. Force of Will. If this card didn't exist, the format would be stupider than it already is. It would be completely whoever won the die roll. Misdirection, which, let me tell you, one of the best things I have ever done in Magic is misdirect an Ancestral Recall to myself. It feels so good. And it was worth paying $77 for it, or tickets for it. I was a little surprised that this card was not in Vintage Masters, since it was reprinted in Conspiracy. And then we've got Two Mental Misstep, which they counterspell a lot of things. Let's see, what do we got? Sol Ring, Voltaic Key, other mental missteps, Ancestral Recall. It counterspells a lot of commonly played cards, and it's very good. And then for cards that we actually have to spend mana on, we have a Flusterstorm, which is really only good at, protecting one of your key spells. But we are a combo deck, so we want to protect a key spell. Steel Sabotage, which is a card against Workshop decks. It does have the added bonus of being able to bounce a Blightsteel Colossus, so it's worth an include in the deck, and it's blue to pitch to Force of Will or Misdirection. We have 3 mana drain decks, or 3 mana drains. A lot of the time, this card is just a hard counter, the card counter spell. But sometimes you can mana drain and then untap into Jace with counterspell backup. Very good. These are all reactive cards. We have one proactive card here, Thoughtseize, which I was losing a lot to Storm, and I didn't want to just give up percentage points to a deck. So I put in a Thoughtseize, and it has applications against the entire format. It's at its worst against Dredge, but even against Dredge, you can still, pluck something. You can pluck something that's good. Maybe a Cabal Therapy so they don't get to cast it twice. Or maybe, I don't know. There's got to be some cards in there. I can't think off the top of my head. And then we've got a Hurkyl's Recall. Card is awesome. It does a lot of nifty things. Mostly it helps you win the game against Workshop decks. And then we have an Abrupt Decay. Abrupt Decay kills so many things. In this deck, it does not kill Griselbrand or Jace the Mind Sculptor, but it blows up every other permanent. Sometimes you need to kill a Mox. Sometimes you need to kill a Chalice of the Void. Interesting note, if someone plays Chalice on 2 against you, you can Abrupt Decay it, because Abrupt Decay can't be counterspelled, and then resolve Oath of Druids. Pretty nifty. And it's got a lot of applications. Postboard, it blows up Grafdigger's Cage, which kind of neuters this deck. So, land, win, get to the win, and here we have our card filtering. Demonic Tutor, awesome, puts the card directly in your hand. Vampiric Tutor and Imperial Seal, which is the same card but at sorcery speed. All of these help you find, Oath of Druids or Forbidden Orchard, Vault or Key, or Show and Tell or Griselbrand. We have 3 different 2-card combos, so this helps us find the one we're missing. Or You could go get a Duress, a Thoughtseize, or a Counterspell, or a Hercules Recall. They're just awesome. Here we have straight filtering. Brainstorm is restricted. That's terrible. Ponder is restricted. I understand why. And we have a Sensi Top. Now, I'm not super happy with Sensi Top because this is a compact format and it doesn't do anything the turn it comes into play for 1 mana. Whereas both of these let me look at up to 3 or 4 cards. And this I have to generate 2 mana to do that, but it's repeatable. I've generally been unhappy with it so far, and it is on the chopping block. I think I might want to try a Preordain over it. We have an Ancestral Recall, straight advantage. Time Walk, straight advantage. Yawgmoth's Will, if you don't hit Gaia's Blessing, you can drop a ton of good stuff in your graveyard for this. And then we've got 2 Jace the Mind Sculptor, which I could see maybe making the Sensi Top a 3rd Jace, or a Tezzeret, or a Preordain, or a Show and Tell. This is like a flex spot, I think. So that's the deck, and the game plan is get a Griselbrand into play, draw a lot of cards, win. Protect yourself while you get there. And now we're going to look at the sideboard. I've got the sideboard grouped off into the archetypes that I would use them in. So here we have Dredge. Got 4 Leyline, 1 Tormod's Crypt, 1 Ravenous Trap. This is actually a little skimpy for Dredge. Most decks run 7 or 8. I was running 8 and it wasn't a problem. So I think maybe running 6 is fine because we are fast. And let me show you what we would take out against Dredge. Misdirection does nothing against them. Hercules Recall. Steel Sabotage. Flusterstorm. Abrupt Decay. And I think generally it's Thoughtseize that will come out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And in go the Graveyard Hates. Next up we have the Workshop deck. So we have 4 cards and this flex card of 5. What do we take out against Workshops? Well, we take out the Misdirection. I like to take out both Metal Missteps, even though it hits Grafdigger's Cage and Sol Ring. They're generally not very good. And then I like to, let's see, I switch it up a lot. I'm still looking for the right combination of cards to take out. But, oh yeah, Flusterstorm doesn't really do anything. And then, depending on how I feel or what their deck makeup is, I'll bring in these 4 cards. And then sometimes I will also bring in Abrupt Decay and maybe take out a Mana Drain or a Jace the Mind Sculptor because it does cost 4. I did have a Dak Faden in here for a while, but it was, and the reason Dak Faden was in here is because you could steal a Lodestone Golem or a Kuldotha Forge Master or a Smokestack if you needed to. Or just like steal their Sol Ring or their Mox and trap them under their own thorns. But it was too inconsistent. It would sit in my hand and I wouldn't be able to cast it because I didn't have my Mox Ruby, my Lotus, or a Forbidden Orchard to play it. And the card filtering isn't that great against other blue decks. It's good, but it's not that great. So that's what I would bring in there. And the Forest is just so we have a Wasteland-proof card. Some of the decks play Ghost Quarter, so it's nice to be able to get a Forest. Nature's Claim is the cheapest spot removal. What we're looking to kill is Grafdigger's Cage or Witchbane Orb. All kinds of good cards. Lock Pieces, it's just decent. And then we've got a Rebuild. Hercules Recall is absolutely better than Rebuild. There's fringe cases where they might have Witchbane Orb that you would want Rebuild. But for the most part, the extra mana is really tough. The reason I am running a Rebuild over a second Hercules Recall is because Hercules Recall costs 44 tickets. I needed to make cuts where I could because I didn't want to spend a lot of actual cash on this deck. And I'll tell you what it cost and what I paid for it after we're done. But yeah, so I cut corners like the show and tell and the second Hercules Recall. So that's shops. Here we have our Storm. This is definitely the Storm sideboard cards. I'm not going to bring in any of the other cards against Storm. I might bring in Abrupt Decay if I feel like I have a potentially dead card. But for these, I take out the Hercules Recall, I take out the Steel Sabotage, excuse me, and I think I generally, I might take out the Abrupt Decay. Depending on the makeup of the deck, I might take out one Griselbrand and leave the Abrupt Decay. Yeah, I don't think I bring in the second Abrupt Decay. Maybe I should be, but I don't. It's really these three for, you know, one of these two and then take out these two. I don't really like my percentage points on Storm. I think I'm a little weak to Storm. But this is a big format, and it's what we've got to work with. For blue X decks, I like to bring in definitely these two cards. Thoughtseize and Swansong. Sometimes I'll bring in Flusterstorm because it helps protect out the Druids. And I usually like to bring in Abrupt Decay because they are probably running Grafdigger's Cage. And what I take out is this Hercules Recall, this Steel Sabotage. Generally, I will take out the Sensi Top, and I will take out the Island. I like to go down to 15 lands against the blue decks, and then bring in all these cards right here. Oh, this Abrupt Decay lives in the deck. So then I bring in this Abrupt Decay as well. And that's my sideboard in against blue decks. Against Delver decks, I bring in the Pyroclasm as well. And I believe I take out one Oath of Druids. Wait, is that right? Yeah. And I take out one Oath of Druids. Because they do have Grafdigger's Cage, and it's going to be harder to win through Oath. This may not be correct, but this is how I used to sideboard back in the day in Classic. Also, against the Mirror, I might do one of these and take an Oath of Druids out because they're playing Oath as well, and I do have a show and tell. So that's how I would sideboard for the Mirror. And then, you know, any fish decks that are not like a Hate Bear deck, I would side in Pyroclasm and Thoughtseize, and both Nature's Claim, Abrupt Decay. And against them, I would take out this Hercules and this Sabotage. I might leave in the Island because they generally play land destruction. And then I probably take out the Sensi Top. And where are you, Misdirection? You come out. And this Flusterstorm comes out. And if they're super heavy on land destruction, I will bring in the Forest and remove no, Metal Misstep is good. That's a flex spot. And that's more theory because I haven't really played very many Null Rod decks that aren't blue. So that's it for the deck tech. Oh yeah, the price. So I bought this deck on June 30th, 2014 for anyone who's watching this a year or two from now. I bought this deck. It cost me just under 1,700 tickets, which I think is a steal. Because when I sold this deck in Classic about 2.5 years ago, close to 3 years ago, I think I got 1,700 tickets for the deck. And that was without the Power 9. So, a bunch of key reprints have made vintage very affordable once you get past the 800 and some odd dollar hurdle of the Power 9. The Power 9 was half the cost of this deck, maybe just slightly under it. Surprisingly expensive cards. Griselbrand, $40. Forbidden Orchard, $11. I know there's the From the Vault version, but I did all of my transaction through MTGO Traders, and they didn't have that. Show and Tell, $80. Misdirection, $77. Hercule's Recall, $44. But after that, the deck was very reasonable. Force of Will was under $30. The dual lands were 15 and 10. Misty Rainforest was 40. That was a little depressing, but it was the cheapest blue card. I think it was 38 to be precise. And then, yeah, some of the cards were dirt cheap. Tolarian Academy, $1. Oath of Druids, $4. Abrupt Decay, like $2. So, yeah. And I spent 100 actual dollars on this deck. How did I accomplish that? I traded Cape Fear Games, who is the brick and mortar store associated with MTGO Traders, a one-off set of dual lands, a one-off set of fetch lands, a Force of Will, and a Wasteland. And that got me $1,300 in credit to the store. And then I sold in person to a local shop that I do not work at, a one-off set of filter lands, some very expensive modern Masters cards that I had acquired, and generally some commander cards I had lying around that I could replace the effect at a much cheaper cost, or I could, wait for a reprint. And that got me another $340. And then, I deposited that in the bank. I went home. I had all my money at once. I bought what I could afford with my $1,300 gift certificate. And then I priced out the rest of it using their bot and cashed in on MTGO online for another $425 in tickets, and then scooped it up. And then I started playing Vintage for about a week. I played about 20 to 30 matches, and I'm ready to hit the two-mans and start recording. So I'll see you guys for round 1.